Good morning and welcome to Coffee and Conversation with Natalie Laing, Director of Operations, NSA. Now, please welcome INSA Executive Vice President John Doyon.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Let me get this going here. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to welcome you to today's program to hear from one of our community's top leaders for the first in our three-part series focused on the evolving national security challenges sponsored by Mantech. So just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have some questions, and we really hope you do, please submit them through the questions box on the right side of your screen. I'll do my best to get to as many questions as time allows. We'd also like to welcome members of the press. Please remember this program is on the record and is being recorded. And finally, a big thank you to our sponsor, Mantech, for their support of this series. We couldn't bring you this level of thought leadership without them. And now I'm pleased to welcome Erin Nordick, Executive Director and Deputy Program Manager at Mantech, to introduce our guest speaker. Erin, over to you.
Thank you, John, and thank you to INSA for hosting this morning's discussion. Now in our 56th year, Mantech is the trusted partner supporting America's mission-critical national and homeland security programs. We proudly serve the intelligence community, the space community, the Department of Defense, and federal civilian agencies that include Departments of State, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Veterans Affairs, Justice, and the FBI, and many other agencies through hundreds of contracts. We tailor best-in-class technologies to meet their needs in AI, full-spectrum cyber, data collection and analytics, and enterprise IT, crafted by world-leading experts in system and software engineering. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Natalie Laing is the Director of Operations at the National Security Agency. In this capacity, she oversees all of NSA's collection, code-breaking, analysis, and production of signals intelligence. She joined the NSA in 1997 as an intelligence analyst and has gone on to serve in a variety of analytic and managerial positions in NSA's Deputy Directorate for Analysis and Production, the Information Warfare Support Center, and Special Collections Service. Ms. Laing supported NSA, EUCOM, and CENTCOM missions through deployments and served as the NSA liaison to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She has served as the S2 Chief of Operations and the Deputy Global Capabilities Manager for the Office of China and Korea. Ms. Laing served as NSA Chief of Staff and most recently as Deputy Director of Operations for National Support. Please join me in welcoming Natalie Laing.
Thank you, Erin, and good morning, Natalie. Welcome to the program. It's really great to have you here to have a conversation today. And let's get started. We'll kick it off. As Erin said, you've served at NSA now for nearly 30 years. And just wanted to ask you, how's your tenure been over that time? And what are some of the significant changes that you've witnessed?
Well, good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you, John, and thank you, Erin, for the great introduction. I appreciate INSA and Mantech's putting on this event today so we can spend some time together talking about, I think, probably some weighty issues. So yes, my tenure has spanned almost 3 decades. I've been at NSA for 27 years. And I think the main 2 strategic shifts or really substantive changes that I've seen would be, of course, on the technology front and what I'd call maybe the global dynamics front. So technology moves really fast, right? So 30 years, that's an eon in tech time, but I'll offer some kind of personal anecdotes to show, I think, what's changed in my tenure at NSA since starting in 1997. So to add a little context to this, when I started at NSA, using fax machines was still prevalent, using email and cell phones was not so prevalent. So this was the world that I entered into NSA. And I started at one of our development programs, which is a fantastic way to join the agency. And they offer 3-year training programs. And at that time, you had to do this kind of big final project, almost like a thesis to graduate the program. And so mine was on traffic analysis, studying some of our adversaries, what we call our targets. And I conducted that entire project, that final project, on big pieces of graph paper that were taped together using a small plastic tool that we called the Guhor stick. So if anybody that joined us online today knows what a Guhor stick is, you've been around quite a while, as long as me. But the bottom line was, it was a plastic tool and it was big pieces of graph paper taped together. And so if you look at what, I don't have my phone with me today because I'm at work, but normally if I have my phone in my hand, that small little device that has 1,000 times the compute power of what I was doing with the goo stick and graph paper, it's really representative of how fast and how far we've come in a relatively short period of time of 30 years. But of course, I think what we've learned in technology, in the technology realm, 30 years is an eon. Things change really rapidly. So that would have to be addressed as one of the substantive changes. But the other changes I've seen have really been temporal and global dynamics related. And so if you think about the big global dynamics shifts we've had at my time at the agency, it was about one a decade. So it started, of course, on 9/11 with the counterterrorism threat ramping significantly up due to the attacks. And then, of course, that changed our entire posture for how we were looking at targets, for how we were focusing our resources. And our agency is good at doing that, but that took a lot of our energy then to respond to that global dynamic. Had some obvious homeland threat angles to that, but it was a global dynamic. And then about a decade later, 2010, when we had Arab Spring, there was still this CT train running through this high target set. But then on top of that, we had multiple Middle East hotspots wrapping up again on top of the CT threat. And the dynamics that that was creating with regional instability, the effects on economics and the effects on further exacerbating terrorist threats, that was a significant shift that stuck with us for some years. And then fast forward about 10 years after that, that's really when there's multiple names for this, but when we started the pivot to Asia, or looking at great competition or strategic competition, near peer competitors, kind of back to that, I wouldn't say back to Cold War days, but back to that massive multifaceted threat. And so I'd say that was the third in 3 of really significant global dynamic shifts that have happened over the tenure of my career so far at NSA.
Right. Well, that is quite a span. It has been quite a dramatic couple of decades. But let me loop back to something you mentioned, 9/11. And that is actually the part of the topic I wanted to talk to you about, because as you know, NSA recently launched a new podcast called No Such Podcast. And in fact, you were one of the guests on the first program. And I think it's great, by the way, and kudos to whoever in your marketing team came up with the name. It's very clever. But I wanted to ask you, what inspired NSA to launch No Such Podcast? And also, the first story, the episode that you started with, the first episode, was all about the story to hunt Osama bin Laden. How did you choose that as the entry to this new transparency type effort you have going?
Yeah, so the No Such Podcast that was a brainchild of our great strategic communications office. They were the ones who thought up of this, launched it, ran them, recorded them, and posted them all. And so I give them a credit for this creative new means of communicating outside the agency. But the actual impetus behind doing this was the fact that we really want to talk about the world's best code makers and code breakers, which are our workforce. And so if you look at what we've been charged to do, we NSA and we Directorate of Operations have been charged to do to protect this nation and defend this nation, and of course our allies. We cannot do that and also tell every little bit of operational detail that we do. So keeping those details secure is what allows us to do the task that's been given to us. But that said, we do want to highlight the people that are doing that work. Maybe we can't share every detail of the work itself, but we want to share the people who are learning and developing and applying extreme talent in this space to get these huge mission results. And so this allows us, as we were talking about the people of NSA and what we do, to really focus on these public servants, these individuals who came into the agency and raised their right hand and swore an oath to defend the Constitution, but also to uphold the Constitution and law and defend our nation. And so highlighting these public servants, we just thought was a very important way of being transparent, but also telling our good news story about our tremendous talent. And how that morphed into the first episode was really, we wanted to, adding to this transparency flavor, talking about our people, celebrating and highlighting the talent we have here. We also wanted to talk about what is SIGINT? What is signals intelligence? SIGINT is not the acronym that rolls off the tongue at every, family dinner table in the United States, and maybe nor should it. But maybe somewhere in between that and what we had, kind of prior to the podcast, there's probably a middle layer of transparency that we wanted to aim at. And so it was describing the entirety of the SIGINT intelligence production cycle. So what we call discovery, collection, analysis. That's really what we wanted to describe to the nation. But it is, in the end, it is a technical process. So as a corollary, we wanted to offer a mission example that hit all those areas of the signals intelligence production cycle to hopefully really bring home what we were talking about instead of just describing a technical process. We wanted to walk through a real world event that was known, I think, by most people, the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and the role that NSA played in that in the US government, in what our nation was able to accomplish, what those mission outcomes led to, but perhaps most importantly, how we applied what we call SIGINT and how we applied what we call that SIGINT intelligence cycle. So that's why we married those two up in that first episode to kick off. And it was myself and my predecessor, a former director of operations, John Darby. And we felt that was a good kickoff for No Such Podcast and hopefully a good way to tell our SIGINT story in a more understandable way.
Great. Well, thinking about NSA and your efforts here at Transparency, do you have any other initiatives in the pipeline along these lines to try to, increase understanding, especially of NSA's signals intelligence mission? I'll just offer, I think there's been a lot of focus on NSA's mission with cybersecurity, but this is the second major mission, right, of NSA. Are there any other initiatives you have in the pipeline regarding transparency?
Sure, I'd say we have some underway. I don't have any new initiatives to launch today or to share today, like the launch of a podcast. But I will share what we're talking about and looking at sort of on a daily basis at this point that lends itself to exactly the question you were asking about. So first, this is something that NSA's senior leadership team, what we call the board of directors, we constantly talk about getting the balance right between sharing things outside the building and maintaining the SIGINT equities, these precious equities that protect our nation. So that's something that we are keeping in a constant dialogue, which I think is healthy. The second thing is I mentioned the Strategic Communications Office that had conceived of and launched No Such Podcast. This is an effort that we really grew up in the last 8 years. We had a very small team prior to that, which is kind of mostly no comment. That's what was needed. We realized that we needed a much more robust strategic communications effort, which we have in place now. They are continuously thinking through creative ideas for NSA to be more transparent. So that's our social media presence, it's the podcast, et cetera. And then finally, in a related position, we have our Civil Liberties, Privacy, and Transparency Officer position. It's a senior officer position at NSA. And this person and their office really are embedded throughout certainly all of our operational activities and operations, but really at the agency and the board of directors level to say, are we hitting the right mark on transparency in the formal reports that go out of the building and just in things we might be able to do better as we engage in any type of forums like this or others. And so as far as initiatives go, I don't think we have anything launching tomorrow that is new, but I'm very confident in the new habits that we've built to build this into every level of conversation at the agency to ensure that transparency, it's in our strategic plan, it's in our charges to ourselves as a board of directors. Yeah. It's become more of a habit of discussion. And so I think this will continue to produce, we hope, novel and transparent communication vehicles.
Great. Well, in the idea of some transparency, let's get to some of the what you can talk about regarding your mission as the director of operations. You lead NSA's global signals intelligence mission. So can you share with us what some of your key priorities are for the next 2 to 3 years?
So first priority, I'd have to say people. We have an extremely large workforce, and we are looking at how we develop that workforce for the challenges ahead, which are very different than they were the last 10 years or certainly when I started at the agency. But bottom line, we need to develop people and create a culture that is going to retain people. And so that is my first priority with a very large workforce. But then I would pair that with maybe I'd call it some data goals and some agility goals. So from a data perspective, we have unbelievably large amounts of data that are coming into this agency. we cannot hire enough humans to go through all that data, and that is not our goal. So where am I matching this incredible people talent we have with tool talent that can do some of this sense making and parse through this data for the humans to really be put against the subset of data that we think is the hardest problem that we really need a human brain on, not a technical machine on. And so data, big data, how we create analytics, how we create workflows, that really has to partner with the people piece. And I'd say on the people front, one of the things that motivates me 27 years into my career at the agency to come into work every day is that I learn something new every single day that I'm at NSA. And often that is from one of the people in this very large workforce that I run in DO. So we want to make sure that we're creating that opportunity that everybody feels like this is still a learning experience after a couple of decades, and they can apply all that tenure of expertise to these hard problems. But I think the last piece, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
the
go
last
ahead.
piece is on the agility front.
Agility.
This is something that has a lot of tentacles, I would say. The first thing is agility through partnerships. And so we've got foreign partnerships, but on this front, we really want to make sure we're as agile as possible in the whole of nation approach to these big targets. So two targets like China and Russia, what are we doing as whole of nation to ensure that we are protected and countering, and that if need be, I hope we don't get to a crisis or conflict stage, how are we ensuring success in countering adversaries if we get to one of those crucial crisis stages? But also agility in the sense of where we are going on data sets, where we are going in the whole of nation effort. And then I'd say technology has to underpin all of this from an agile perspective. What are we doing to partner on the right technology inside and outside of NSA? And what are we doing to make sure that we have our analytics and our workflows honed enough to really meet this hyper digitally connected world that we're in today? So that agility to move between multiple crises that we're facing right now on a global front, and we'll probably have a chance to go through some of those at some point, that requires tremendous agility. We don't have the relative luxury we used to have of one major focus from a target set. So that agility has a lot of play. And I'd say those three things are really what are my goals for the next 2 to 3 years. Of course, there's the threats in there. There's the China, the Russia, Iran. But if we're not doing these key three things, honestly, we're not going to get those adversary countering right.
Right. So you started talking about data, and I always love to talk about data. Sorry to jump in a little early there. But that really gets to, emerging technology issues and things like, compute power, artificial intelligence. How are some of these emerging technologies that are coming out supporting NSA operations, and what are some of maybe your challenges there as far as adopting them quickly enough or getting them into your workflows and operations?
So I'd say there's kind of maybe three things there. There's the quantum side, and there's maybe the AI ML side, and then there's the emerging technology side, which of course all of that is emerging technology. But it speaks to, your question speaks to about three different angles of what we're looking at the agency. On the quantum side, from a quantum intelligence or quantum information science perspective, this is a community we have been deeply involved with and partnered with since 1995 or 1996. But really what we want to look at maybe is threefold. On the quantum information science front, our main goal, among many, is to ensure that we stay ahead of our adversaries on the quantum front. So that quantum information science has a lot of facets, but bottom line, we need to stay ahead of adversaries who would use this in nefarious ways against our nation and our allies. The second thing I would share on quantum is NSA is, and listeners may or may not know this, but NSA from a cybersecurity front is the national security systems owner. So we are the protector and the designer of all the standards of all of the national security systems, so all of the classified systems. And so we had issued significant guidance to help mitigate against large quantum computing threats from our adversary. And so that's agencies under their cybersecurity hat role, but that is another very specific role we have in quantum. The third, I'd say, is on the quantum information science, the frontier piece. What we're really trying to push is the ability for, bottom line, us to help the US protect its data and to protect its critical infrastructure. Where I might fear some of these threats the most is a massive quantum compute capability against a massive part or all of our critical infrastructure, or some of our key, pick your data set, banking, intelligence and government sets, healthcare. These are threats that we think about daily, and how we apply quantum intelligence and quantum information science is really key in this piece. Our research directorate is daily working with private industry and with academia to continue research and conceptual development on this front. So that's how I'd speak to the quantum piece. The machine learning, artificial intelligence and machine learning, of course, we could spend hours alone on that, but I'd offer a couple high points and maybe specific to what my directorate, what operations is doing, because we're about half the agency. So we're looking at what we call sense making. And so part of this is having the machines take these very large, very complex data sets and neck it down to a understandable or reviewable data set for analysts to work at, but also so that I can create more efficiency in my analyst day to use them on the really hard problems, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that we need them working on. And so machine learning and the ability to do that high-powered compute in that space against complex data sets is really key. And we have a lot of legacy and manual approaches to this that really speak to the need to bring in more automation. So that is a big goal for us. But then as we look at maybe what I'd call patterns of behavior from our targets and our adversaries' perspective, doing that at scale is also something that is very hard to hire enough people to do. So as we successfully combine multiple sensors around the world, whether that's private industry and cybersecurity, as we're talking malicious cyber threats, or NSA's indications and warning for both cybersecurity or combat support, for indications of military attack. The ability to sense make, if I can use that as a word, all those multiple sensors into a position that helps us understand what's happening, how we can provide indications and warning. This is what we really need to do from you see the pattern here, from a large data set, complex data set, and producing a common picture. And so those are the things I'd say both on quantum and artificial intelligence and machine learning. But I think those are both emerging technologies. But in general, some of the process questions you'd asked about how do we work with private industry, as an example, on emerging tech. One of the things that we are trying to include in all of our either formal partnerships to develop something or just our conversations on, hey, what does this nation need, is the ability to understand and articulate what the technical requirements are way left in any discussion or development cycle. Because of the complexity of the SIGINT system and the system engineering and network engineering that's behind that, if we agree broadly on developing a joint capability and we wait till 75% development mark to say, hey, how does that actually interact with a secure classified system? And if we haven't built that in from the very beginning, we've lost time, of course, but we're already losing the battle to take the best advantage of emerging technology. So those are three very interrelated, but I'd say different focus areas of what we're looking at in conjunction. We operations are looking at that, partnering with our research and our capabilities and our technical development directorates to hopefully succeed on this front. But it's a lot. It's a wide waterfront to cover emerging or disruptive technology.
Well, picking up on what you said about partnering, let's kind of continue looking at some partnering issues. And you had mentioned earlier, as part of your agility priority, reliance on foreign partners. So let's talk about working with U.S. allies and your foreign partners and international cooperation. How's it going with the NSA's work with its, partner intelligence agencies around the globe to achieve, mutual objectives and ensure that critical intelligence is being shared and helping us achieve our objectives?
So if I had to answer in one word, I'd say it's, or maybe two words, robust and healthy. We have a large number of foreign partnerships with our allies, and I'd offer a couple areas of specificity for where we need to maintain healthy relationships and where it's actually, I think, working quite well. So it's both the geopolitical piece and then the actual joint operations piece. On the geopolitical front, the way that things work now, I don't anticipate, I said in the beginning that we had these big global dynamic shifts maybe once a decade. I don't think that's our world going forward. If you look at Russia invading Ukraine, a year-ish and a half later, Hamas invading Israel, these are things that are happening every year and then multiple times within a year. That's the truth of the environment that we live in. So the ability to have foreign partnerships who have different perspectives on what that geopolitical shift is, and we can come together very quickly to build a common picture of the threat or the concern and how our countries are partner. Having those deep relationships already allows us to immediately make progress on how we're going to respond to a geopolitical shift. But on the operational side, we really are very tightly tied. I talked about the SIGINT production cycle of discovery and looking for new tradecraft, and then collection and analysis and cybersecurity. We do all of those operations jointly with our allied partners. And so this produces scale, frankly, that a China and Russia will not have. When you look at some partnerships they have of a marriage of convenience, I would call it, we have deep, abiding, talent-filled partnerships with common goals that have been built on many, many years and in some cases decades of partnership. So I think that's kind of advantage USA on that front. But I need to, I think, underscore here that how those work is just as important as what we do. So I covered what we do, but the how we do it is really with a broad understanding of the rigorous protocols needed to underpin that sharing. So understanding of each nation's laws and the policies that are derived from that, that's very important to maintain constant awareness of. We NSA, have oversight from the Director of National Intelligence and to some extent the Department of Defense on what we may share at a very detailed level with each of these partners. So it is incumbent upon us to track that and make sure we're sharing within those parameters. But it's also, I think, become a healthy habit for us with our partners to do some exercises on, put a scenario out on the table and walk through, hey, if this happened today, would all of our individual laws and policies allow us what we need to do to respond as partners to fill in the blank threat? And so that's proven, I think, very useful. And then finally, our ability to share information securely. This is a constant focus between partners, because as you might imagine, signals intelligence systems wind up being very complicated, just our own. Combine that with another partner's very complicated or intertwined signals intelligence systems, and you can see where the complexity, accentuates in a hurry. And so this has to be a regular, just the basic network engineering and how things connect has to be a regular focus as well. So the partnerships are strong and healthy, but I think that's just pulling back the covers a little bit on what goes into keeping them and maintaining them healthy and what they produce.
So you had thinking back to your priorities, you had agility, data, and you also had people was at the top of your list. So let's go back and touch on people. And this might be my last question before we turn to the audience. We're getting a lot of audience questions in, so I want to get to some of those. A number of our audience members are students, so we always ask sort of what tips would you give to students who want to work at NSA and be hired at NSA, but also, are you hiring? Do you have recruiting goals for 25? And really, what are you doing to help just build your NSA workforce?
Yeah, so first of all, I would heartily encourage anybody that's applied or that's interested to apply. I have been here 27 years. It is a fantastic career. But let me share some details around that. So first of all, just to check out opportunities, you can go to intelligencecareers.gov or nsa.gov. I won't even have time to list them all here, but there's a wealth of opportunities at the collegiate level, even at the high school level, frankly, to work at NSA. So there's what we call co-op programs. There are internship programs, summer internship programs. There are multiple programs to sort of try NSA out. They are competitive, but there are so many that it should hit numerous interests across whether it's STEM fields or whether it's budget and acquisition, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's deep operational looks like I do in operations, lots of opportunities across all of those. But as you're considering a career, what I would say to aspiring students is consider the impact you want to have in the nation. Consider how interested you are in knowing what's going on in every corner of the world. Consider how interested you are in deep technical knowledge, whether that's crypt or systems engineering or network engineering, crypto mathematicians, physicists. How they apply that to national security problems is astounding. And it astounds me every day when I hear the successes of what we're able to achieve for impact. So if that's the type of impact you're looking in the nation, keep digging for opportunities. And as I say, we are always hiring. Some years we might be a little, few hires, other years we're higher hires as you'd have in any company. But this is a consistent focus for us. And I would be remiss if I did not mention one way to join the agency after college degrees are finished, which are development programs. We have a development program for almost every major area from a kind of skill field and work role perspective at NSA. That ranges from languages to analysis, data science, computers, pretty much everything that's our major work roles. I joined the agency through one of these development programs, the Intelligence Analysis Development Program. I had gone to college, I had worked for 6 years, and then I joined in this 3-year program. And my first reaction was, what, it seems a lot. But when I got into the program, I realized it won't ever be enough to learn the agency in 3 years. But what a great foundation to join the agency. You join with a cohort and a network. It's a very structured program for a very wide swath of targets. It's a great way to join. So those are just a few of the high points that I'd recommend for the students online to consider, to do research, check with your universities for any contacts in the intelligence community, preferably NSA. I'll speak parochially for our agency, but there's a lot of recruiting efforts out there to answer additional questions in addition to the websites that I offer.
Great. Hey, thanks for that. And I'm going to switch to some audience questions now. In addition to students, we also have a lot of small businesses with us, joining us today. So this one touches on that a little bit. Can you talk about how NSA's SIGINT industrial base, from thinking about processing and satellites and all the technical capabilities that NSA has had, how that's changed over your career of the last 27 years? And to what extent has NSA expanded from working with large companies that had, these sort of exquisite capabilities to really engaging smaller companies that have niche, technical firms, maybe they're in Silicon Valley, maybe they're just right here in the DMV area. Can you talk about how that has changed over your career?
Yeah, so when I started at NSA in 1997, we really were the no such agency or never say anything, the various variations on our acronym. And we had to tell people we work for Department of Defense. It just was a very, very different time. We don't have enough time to go into some of the disclosures and just developments technology-wise that have changed the level of transparency we need to have today. But all of those equate to bringing us to a healthier place where we are today. And I do think the better transparency is exactly where we need to be. From a technology front or a small business front, I've seen significant change at the agency for interaction between us and private industry. And I will use cybersecurity as a really relevant example in this space. We've always had a cybersecurity mission at NSA. It's our bread and butter, signals intelligence and cybersecurity. The cybersecurity mission for years was called information assurance and was kind of a separate mission. It was very important. It was very NSA driven. But we have, over the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, we've completely combined those into one big NSA mission. So we have a cybersecurity directorate, just like we have an operations directorate. So that has been a change that had never happened prior to in NSA's existence, in our 70 plus years of existence. So that's thing one. But thing two, the cybersecurity mission has been a way for us to really talk in greater detail than we ever had in the past about NSA's mission, to show how we apply signals intelligence for cybersecurity effects. One specific way we do that is through the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, which is a wholly unclassified center set up only to have these kind of conversations about cybersecurity and protecting the nation. Now, a lot of that winds up being defense industrial based because we don't have really the authority to talk to every private industry company. But for any of that defense industrial base, we've been granted new authorities to have very detailed conversations on, here's what we can share from a signals intelligence perspective to shore up cybersecurity. What are you able to see in private industries companies for helping secure through partnership all our various networks and infrastructure across the United States? Massive change in how we've seen things done. From a space perspective, you touched on maybe space or commercial space. This is an area we're still feeling our way through. Space is the final frontier. That old phrase does apply here. we are really still mapping our way through what that looks like jointly, because there are commercial space companies and there are SIGINT satellites and SIGINT companies, or SIGINT organizations, I should say. So we are figuring out at a national level, and by we, I mean the government is figuring out at a national level, what does that look like? Who governs that? What is the line between commercial space and signals intelligence? And that, I think, will really help us drive technology discussions and interplay between private industry and government on that front. So they're very different, but I'd say those are two big changes, with everything kind of moving to space-based infrastructure and architecture, and cybersecurity being so prevalent and so imbued now through the agency. Those are two massive shifts I've seen in my time here.
Great. Hey, we have a really good question here, which will, perhaps press into the area of NSA's transparency. So it's prefaced with, as much as you could say, what is NSA's role when, say, a regime in the Middle East crumbles? So what's it been like over the last handful of days here with the situation in Syria? How does NSA as an agency respond to a world event like that?
So the way that we operate day to day is based on priorities, very specific priorities that are set for us by the White House, by the Director of National Intelligence, and by the Department of Defense. To say, hey, here are our top national needs. We need you to go do everything in your SIGINT and cybersecurity cycle to report back to us on that. So do your complicated collection, do your complicated analysis, and then hone these exquisite insights for us so we, the government, can make our national policy making decisions and know and understand how to respond into multiple crises. Not just this. You could have taken out the regime change in the last couple of days and picked another label over the last year, pick your hotspot in the Middle East. There's been a lot going on. So that is the way that we contribute to the USG response to any of this. We have very specific requirements. We have a very detailed understanding of how to go about collecting and analyzing all those requirements, and then packaging them into insight for use at the government level for either building a response or just having a clear understanding of what's going on. And maybe as importantly, this isn't specifically to this regime change question, but I would add a little bit, if something happens in the world, if we are able to say through our signals intelligence, hey, that was actually a miscalculation, or no, that was very intentional, those are critical insights to really give through a human intelligence, which is another agency, or our signals intelligence, to give to our policymakers to either respond or just have a basic understanding to know how they need to kind of work through their days. And that might not be a response, but they need to know what they don't have to respond to. And they need to know where they can move forward based on clear intelligence. And so that's what we provide into this whole process.
Great. Hey, we're getting a couple of questions in here about open source. And so one, I'll read one. Can you speak to how NSA is evolving in its use of open source and or collection of publicly available information, commercially available information, to augment its traditional SIGINT mission?
I can speak to that. And it's a two-part path, I'd say. We are part of the working group that the Director of National Intelligence has on what they call CAI-PAI, commercially available information, publicly available information. So we're helping form, again, a government-wide response and policy on how we will work this data and include this data. But then on a more specific operational front, we've evolved somewhat, or we are evolving, I should say, on how we use open source. We've always used open source, or what we might call collateral, to augment what we have as signals intelligence fact. But we have never reported anything in the past that is just based on open source, because our bread and butter has been you do SIGINT fact, you do not pull in other things that might be opinion or that are not based in SIGINT fact. So we are working right now to say, well, what would it look like if we have significant open source that answers an intelligence question, but it did not come from our signals intelligence collection. So we're working through what the possibilities there might be now, just because we know the ubiquitous amount of data that's available. We don't have the corner on all that in signals intelligence. So those are the two ways we're working through that. We've always used open source to augment, but what could we do now if that is the only source that we might use, but under a SIGINT umbrella? So those are the three things we're working on now for that.
Okay. Hey, let me ask you another question. Back to small businesses. Can you talk some more about how NSA is working with small businesses who have innovative approaches but don't have the necessary clearances yet. So there's a couple other questions here about contractors trying to get the right types of clearances to work with NSA. How do you get your foot in the door if you're a small business and you've got a technology you think NSA would benefit from? How do you get that but you don't have clearance yet?
So I'll share with what I know. This is more of our budget and acquisition folks. So I'll be a little bit out of my depth, but I'll share my understanding of this. So I think there are several ways. First of all, for our request for proposal process that goes through our budget and acquisition directorate, they have a specific carve out for small businesses. And so I think this is the intent to not just always have the big government agencies working with the big defense intelligence base companies. So that's specifically designed to make sure that we have the innovation from all of those fronts. So I think that's thing one. Thing two is there are information sessions that our budget and acquisition directorate sets up for questions like this of how would you, if you can't respond to an RFP, how would I kind of get my foot in the door? And so there are some angles there that this budget and acquisition directorate covers to answer those questions. And then finally, as we have events at, for example, with In-Q-Tel, a company that really ties government agencies together with businesses who are doing innovative things, I would really recommend seeking out companies like that that are, it's not exactly the right phrase, but sort of venture capitalists for opportunity, connecting intelligence needs with innovation in the business side. We tend to evolve towards a lot of those forums so that we're not creating unfair advantage by just saying, hey, we're going to talk to these 5 companies, but not the other 500. And so we tend to lean towards those type of consortiums where we do need these connections, but to do it at scale, that's a bit harder. Finally, for getting clearances, I can't actually answer that question. I apologize. That would be something that if somebody puts in an RFP, our budget and acquisition directorate works through how you would get cleared by the agency. It can take a long time once the agency starts a contract with a contractor or a company to get everybody. If nobody is cleared, they would need to go through the normal adjudication process and polygraph process, and we know exactly what that looks like. And so there's no real mystery there. I think how you really start that is by, once a contract is finalized with the government gives you very clear details on what it takes to gain the security clearances needed to work the contract.
Okay. We have time for one more question, and that's going to be from Joe Imwal over with MTSI in Chantilly, and he asked, what is the biggest operational challenge NSA faces in adapting to emerging threats, and how can industry better support you?
So scale right now would be, I could say many, many major challenges, but scale is the main challenge right now. So I mentioned 2 major invasions and conflicts, Russia invading Ukraine, Hamas invading Israel, and all the subsequent Middle East hotspots that have followed. Sustained surge on working things around the world is not a way that we want to go forward. We should either be in sustained mode or surge mode, but we need to figure out how to scale this. So part of that is with some of the comments I made on data and sense making and where we can get machine learning and AI to help on that front. But the other thing is really having conversations that make this a national issue of how we respond. And so we don't expect every company to pick up a national security mantle, and we don't expect us on the national security side to get into private industry business. But when we see and we can articulate the breadth of the threat to what we see China doing in our critical infrastructure, where we see malicious cyber actors in the bedrock of our nation in healthcare and hospitals and banks and regulatory commissions and our electricity and utilities, like this should worry us all. And so how we partner on that front becomes even more critical. And it doesn't mean that everybody in the private industry needs to be cleared and the government controls what private industry does. But if we have a common goal and we recognize the scale of the threat on multiple fronts, those are the 2 things. That's, really, if I had to distill it, that would be my main goal. But those are the 2 underlying pieces that I would say we're facing.
Okay. Well, Natalie, we are out of time, but I'll ask you, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
No, I would just say, well, I guess I do have one. I would say thank you for gathering in these forums to think through these things. This is exactly kind of the comments I finished with people who care about these topics for overall national security. It shouldn't be a whole of government thing like China does, where they don't respect what we call rule of law and division between business and private industry and government. But the ability to move more seamlessly across all these fronts to partner really, I do think, comes down to having a common understanding of the threat. And so spending time in these kind of forums to hear thoughts on both sides, to hear questions that are on your mind is helpful to me. I hope it was helpful to you. But these continued conversations, I think, are really what will help us scale.
Great.
So
Well, thanks again, Natalie, for joining us this morning and for your insights. It's been great talking with you and very informative. And I also want to thank our friends at Mantech for sponsoring the series. And for everyone who took time to join us online, thank you as well for being part of today's program. When the webinar ends, a short survey will pop up. Please take a moment to complete it and let us know how we did. Looking ahead, want to note a few things. We'll close out the year with a coffee and conversation on December 19th with Jimmy Hall, who's the CIO and Director of Technology and Innovation for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the State Department. He'll be looking and talking about their IT modernization efforts, expansion of TS-SCI capabilities, OSINT, and AI integration. As we kick off 2025, you can put on your calendar another coffee and conversation on the 15th of January with Dr. Timothy Wood, who's the Deputy Program Manager for Mars at DIA. He'll also be looking at how they integrate OSINT technologies, the role of AI and machine learning and big data analysis, and using commercial solutions. It should be a really great conversation. We have a couple of in-person events as well. Coming up next year, on the 28th of January, we'll have a discussion on U.S. Cyber Command's new acquisition authorities. And then in celebration of Black History Month, join us please for a conversation called Future Focused National Security Priorities 2025, which will be at the Amazon headquarters too in Arlington on the 5th of February. We'll have an all-star panel featuring the Honorable Ron Moultrie and Charles Carruthers with other speakers to be announced. Learn more about all these events at insaonline.org. And lastly, with the end of the year, I want to thank everyone who's participated with us this past calendar year. And thank you for your participation and questions and feedback. They help to shape our programming. And we're proud to share our annual report for 2024, which is available on our website. It's also on the tab in our webinars documents. Please take a moment to review what we've been able to accomplish together over the past year. On behalf of everyone at INSA, we extend our warmest wishes to you for a joyful holiday season. Thank you again and for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.